Hewlett-Packard, and NASA, Niki shattered sales records in many industries, receiving multiple top producer awards along the way. Today, entrepreneurs and small business owners from a wide range of disciplines hire Niki to show them how to sell successfully and authentically without being pushy or salesy. Niki's 3 popular books are available at Amazon, and her podcast, Sales Maven, can be found on your favorite podcast platform. Please welcome Niki Roche.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for having me here this morning. I am excited to share with you this idea of mastering the sales conversation. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about why it's not just about filling a sales funnel. Those of you who have a sales background probably hear that a lot about fill your funnel. So we're going to talk about that. I am going to share with you the number one mistake that costs most people business. So the idea today is that if this is something that you fall into, it's time to do something different. And I'm going to give you some ideas of how to do that. Then I'll share the 5 simple steps to mastering the sales conversation, and of course more, because we want your Q&A, we want your questions at the end. So as I'm talking through things today, if there's something that I say that you're like, what? Or I'm not sure about this, please pop it in the chat box, because Steve is going to read your questions to me at the end. And the Q&A is usually where a lot of we can get down into the nitty gritty stuff that really makes a difference to your business today. The goal is that when you leave here, you can immediately start implementing some of these things that I'm going to be teaching about. Now, Steve had mentioned a little bit about my background and my bio. In addition to what you've heard, I have been a sales trainer and in the sales world for over 25 years. I'm also a master certified practitioner of neurolinguistic programming. And how that shows up in the conversation is that I have a knack for language. I love the sales language, and learning how to just slightly add tweaks to what you're saying and how you're saying it so there's more impact. So that's how the NLP comes into effect. I started my business in 2013. And as Steve mentioned, I have published 3 books and I have a podcast called The Sales Maven Show. All right. So it's been my pleasure over the last few years that I have trained hundreds of people how to sell successfully. And the goal is that today you are able to take away something that you can, again, implement into your business and immediately see results. So let's talk about this concept of how it's more than a funnel. Now, coming from my background of 25 years of sales, I used to have a boss that used to scream this at me, fill your funnel, Niki. And when you're out trying to grow your business, of course, we want to be attracting more leads into the business, but leads don't always mean sales. So, yes, you should be marketing, and that's absolutely crucial to growing your business. But what do you do once the lead comes in the door? And this is where I find oftentimes people start to struggle is they're not really sure how to take that lead and walk them through the sales conversation. So that's where I come in and now teach people about the sales conversation. And I teach it in a 5-step process that I call the selling staircase. So we're going to focus on that today. I'm going to go into some detail about the steps and how to move through them again, so that you have some awareness. Where are some places that are really working for you in the sales conversation? And where are some places that maybe need a little bit more attention? So here are the 5 steps of the selling staircase. The first one is introduction. Now I'm going to dig into this a little bit deeper here in just a second, but I just wanted you to see the 5 steps. And to me, the progression is it's your job to earn somebody's business. And that means it's your job to move a client from step to step to step. So step 1 is that introduction piece. Step 2 is learning how to create curiosity. So people are like, tell me more, or I'm interested, I want more. And then we move to step 3, which is discovery. Those are your consultation calls. Those are those like in-depth conversations that you're having with a prospect. And then once you've done that well, then you move to proposal, ultimately then to close. Now, like I said, I'm going to dig into these a little bit deeper, but I wanted you to see the 5 steps first and the way they're laid out. Because here is the number one mistake that is costing people business and costing people sales is that in the sales conversation, we try to skip steps. We want to go right from that like initial introduction right to the close. Now, sometimes it's because we know we can help that person and we're super passionate about making a difference to them. Other times it's because maybe we're a little less confident of the sales technique and process and we're not really sure what to do or say. But when you skip steps, often what happens is you end up with a client who's either confused, maybe a little bit frustrated, feel like you're not listening to them. And sometimes you get those people who are a little bit angry, right? So we don't want that. So the idea is to not skip steps in the selling process. So I teach this 5-step process. I will say there's one little caveat about skipping steps. So I always like to have like, what's one way you could skip a step? The only time you're really allowed to skip steps in the sales process is when the client comes to you or the prospect comes to you and says, I'm ready to buy. I don't expect you to go like, hey, now slow down, take a step back. We got to go back to the introduction and then work our way up. So if they're ready to buy, you can absolutely go with them and skip the steps. But if you're trying to earn somebody's business, your job is to move them through the process and not try to skip steps. Like if you imagine taking all of your prospects and standing them in front of like a 5 steps staircase, and you just say like, hey, from a standing position, just hop up to the top of that step, to the top step there. Most people will look at you like you're crazy. They'll be like, "What? No, I'm not going to do that. What if I bang my shins?" Right? Like that doesn't feel good. So, it's the same kind of impression when you try to skip steps as you leave people feeling like, "What? This something doesn't feel right here." So, let's talk through the steps and I want to give you some suggestions and some ideas of what's happening in each step so that you start to understand, is there a chance that in certain conversations you missed a step? And can you go back and pick it up and then work somebody through the process? All right. So, step one again is this introduction. And the idea behind the introduction is this is when it's your job to make a positive first impression. Now, an introduction can happen when somebody Googles you and finds your website. You got to make a powerful first impression there, with your copy, with how beautiful your site is. If you're at a BNI event, you're meeting people for the first time, you know what it's like to go to these live events and meet people face to face and go like, "Oh, this is somebody I'm interested in talking about or talking more with," or meeting somebody that you're like, "Ooh, this person comes off a little aggressive or a little pushy, so I'm going to look to see who else is in the room," or showing up at events, now virtual events, and deciding like who is like like drawing you in, who is making you feel like, this person seems like they've got something going on here. I'm interested to know more about them. So make sure that you're making a positive first impression. That can oftentimes be in the way that you introduce yourself. It can be in the way that you greet somebody. One of the tips I'll give for when we're back doing live, I don't know if any of you guys are back doing live BNI events yet. I know kind of in my area they're not doing live networking yet. But one of the things I often found is when I would meet somebody for the first time, I would always say like, "Hi, I'm Nikki Roush." And they would go, "Oh, hi, Nikki. It's nice to meet you." And one of the steps they would skip is saying their name. Now I'm in the position where do I have to ask their name? Or like, and what if they want to earn my business? So make sure when you're out and about and you're meeting people for the first time, you say your name. Make it easy for people to start to make a connection to you. That's just one way to make a positive first impression, but it goes a long way when you make it easy for people. Now, once you've kind of gotten through step one, we move to step two. Step two, by the way, is probably one of the most missed steps in the selling conversation. Step two is about creating curiosity. The idea around creating curiosity is it's your job to engage a prospect in a way that they want more from you. They want to ask you questions. It's a conversation that happens. Now, I'll give you just one little idea around the creating curiosity. I often compare it to it's the difference between how you call a dog and how you call a cat. Now, I know that might sound a little crazy, so bear with me here for a second. But if you think about people when they want to get their dog's attention, a lot of times they'll do this thing where they'll go like, "Come here, boy, come here." And it's like the dog love that energy. They're like, "Oh, something fun's going to go on. I want to come. I want to play." But when you show up in a conversation with somebody and you have what I call dog calling energy, like, "Oh my gosh, my product's the best. I can help you." Da 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 da. Da," people go like, "Ugh, too much." Like, I'm going to pull away from this person. Who else can I talk to? Or how do I get out of this conversation as fast as possible? So the opposite of that is this cat calling energy. Now, if you think about when you want to call a cat, oftentimes we do this thing where we go, "Here, kitty, kitty." You got to create a little intrigue for the cat to want to come to you. So when you're in conversation with somebody, you don't want to word vomit and tell them everything about what you do and all your history and all these things. Instead, you want to tell them just enough for them to want to ask you a question, for them to want to know more. So when somebody says, like, "Hey, how are you?" for instance, I want you to actually have an answer to that question that draws people in, that makes people want to know more. So for instance, instead of saying when somebody says, "Oh, Nikki, how are you?" I don't want to say like, "Oh my gosh, I'm great. My podcast just hit this huge number. We've had all these downloads and people from around the world are listening," right? That's a little bit too much. But if somebody said, "Nikki, how are you?" and I said, "Oh, I'm great. Just hit a milestone with my podcast that I'm feeling pretty good about." That gives somebody an opportunity to ask me a potential question about my business. And this again is a misstep because most of the time we don't answer questions in a way that makes somebody go like, what does that mean? Tell me more. What's your podcast about? Or who are your listeners? Or anything about that that gives you permission to talk about your business. And by the way, if you're showing up at networking events and you're leaving and thinking, "I don't think I ever really talked about my business," it's probably because you're missing this step. Because what happens when you start to create curiosity, people might go like, "Oh, that's so interesting. I could use some support with that." Right? Or "Tell me more." Well, now we've got permission to invite them to step 3. What happens is they start to give buying signals. Buying signals are verbal and nonverbal cues that people give that indicate interest. So if you say something and somebody says, like for instance, Steve was talking to me a little bit before we started the webinar this morning, and he was talking about his business, that he's a copywriter. Now, a lot of us need a copywriter, right? And if I said to him like, "That's so interesting, I have a project that I'm working on. I could use some help with copy." I want him to invite me to step 3. Step 3 is the discovery. That's where it's his job in this particular case, if he wants me as a potential client, to invite me to step 3 and do what some people would call a consultation. I call it discovery because I want you to be really curious in this conversation, that to find out what's the struggle, what's the want, what's the need, and then to ask strategic questions that lead the person to hiring you. One of the mistakes that people often make is they get somebody into that discovery call and they just try to sell, sell, sell the whole time, but they don't take the opportunity to learn about the person and to set them up that they lead very naturally to the next step. So, one of the things that can happen in the discovery, and here's a tip that I'll give you, is we miss doing what I call a pre-frame. A pre-frame is setting the stage for what's going to happen in the call. It creates safety between you and the other person, and it allows for you to be the expert and kind of lead that call. Because if you just say like, "Tell me everything you want me to know about your project," to a prospect, they might be talking for hours. So instead, if you say, "Now, the purpose of the discovery call today is to find out a little bit more about your project and see if I'm the best fit for you. Is it okay if I start with a couple quick questions?" Now you're in charge. Now you're leading the conversation. Now, again, your job is to ask really good questions here in the discovery that lead you to step 4, which is the proposal. Once we get to the proposal part of the conversation, this is where the selling happens. And I'm going to talk about how to move through these steps just a little bit more in a second here. But in the proposal, your job is to really stand in your place of authority and credibility and recommend what the client needs, not what you think they can afford. This is a mistake that business owners make oftentimes, is we project our own limiting beliefs. We look at someone and go, they might never pay this much for what they really need, so I'm going to offer them this less expensive thing. That's doing a disservice to the client, and frankly, it's doing a disservice to your business. So recommend what they need, not what you think they can afford. Don't make assumptions about that. And then once you've done the proposal, now this is the most misstep in the selling staircase, is the close. So you've laid out a great proposal. Your job now is to issue close language. And close language shows up as a yes or no question. I'm going to give you an example of it here just in a second. When you issue the close language, your next step is to zip it and be quiet. You know that old saying, like that little game you used to play maybe as a kid. It's like, whoever speaks second wins. I want you to win in this conversation. So issue the close and then wait. Allow for the prospect to either make an objection or to say yes or to say no or whatever is going to happen in between. But you've got to get all the way to the close. And if you're not getting close language out of your mouth, I can guarantee you are walking away from potential clients right now, left and right. You have to get the close language out of your mouth. So this is how you move clients from step to step to step, is you issue invitations along the way. Invitations often show up in the form of a question. So for instance, if we were on step 2 and I create some curiosity and I want to invite somebody to step 3, I might say to them, is that something you'd like to talk about more? So for instance, back to the example that I gave about Steve, if I said to Steve, I have a project that I'm working on. I could probably use some copy. I could probably use somebody who does what you do. Now, if he wants to earn my business, he could just say Nikki, should we go ahead and set up a time to chat more about this? Or do you have time now to talk more about this? That's how you get somebody to the next step. You issue that invitation. Now, I mentioned that it's really important that you not sell during the discovery process. When you're in discovery, you don't sell. When you get to proposal, that's where you're selling. So discovery, you're asking questions. And how you move somebody from discovery to proposal, for instance, is to say something as simple as this. Based on what you've shared so far, I see a few ways that we might work together. Would you be interested in learning more about that? And then you wait. When you've issued the invitation, then you wait and you be quiet and you let them say yes or no. Now they say yes. So now I can clearly lay out my proposal to them. I can recommend what I know is going to be the best fit for them. And then I'm going to issue close language. And I want to give you a couple examples of close language, again, because this is the most misstep in the selling process. An example of close language might be to say to somebody, here's what I would recommend. So I did the proposal, and then say, is that something you'd like to move forward with? And then wait. Now notice this is a yes or no question. This isn't an open-ended question. When you get to the close, it needs to be a yes or no. So that's one way you might say it. Or you might say, this is something that we could get scheduled to work together as early as Thursday. Should we go ahead and do that now? That's another example of close language. So make sure you're issuing close. If somebody says, well, how much is it? Then you say the price. You say, this particular project is $100,000. I'm just making up a price. Is that something you'd like to move forward with? Or is that something we can get started for you? Or should we go ahead and get that scheduled? Should I schedule to have that delivered to you? Would you like to place an order today? Those are all closed language questions. And notice they're yes or no questions. Okay. So that's the selling staircase. Now, oftentimes when you get to the close, sometimes the thing that will come up is the person will say this to you. They'll say, well, I need to think about it. Do you ever get told, I need to think about it? Now, what do you say next? Because it is super crucial in order to earn somebody's business that you don't say to them, oh, okay, think about it. Let me know, because they won't let you know. Not because they don't want to work with you, not because you can't solve a problem for them, but because if you don't stay engaged in the conversation and make it easy for somebody to buy from you, oftentimes they'll forget that they need you because they're bombarded with a million things. As soon as they get off the call with you or they end the conversation with you and then they walk away, it's not that they won't ever think about you again, but the chance of earning their business, if you say, oh, okay, think about it and let me know, that's asking them to do too much work. So I'm going to give you some actual language of what I say when somebody tells me I need to think about it. Here's what I say. Great. About how much time do you think you need? Let's go ahead and schedule a circle back call now. That way I can answer any additional questions that come to mind and we can decide on best next steps for working together. Now you can tweak this language and make it your own in any way that you want. The idea, though, is that you get the next step scheduled before you leave that conversation, or at least you make the effort to schedule it. Now, if the person says to you, like, I'll let you know, don't call me, I'll call you, honor that. As a matter of fact, I personally don't believe in chasing clients. So if somebody says to me, if I say, let's schedule a circle back call, and they're like, Nikki, I'll let you know, I always say, great. I'd love to earn your business when you're ready. Please know you're welcome to reach out to me because I am not going to chase clients. I always say if you chase clients, they often turn into toddlers. I don't know if you have a toddler in your home or if you've been around a toddler lately, but if you say to a little toddler, I'm going to chase you, what do? They like take off and run even before they even know what the game is. But as soon as you stop chasing a toddler, what happens? They start to inch their way back to you. So you don't want to send the message to your client or a prospect, I'm just going to chase you, because they will run. So keep it professional. Sales, I would say sales relationships are two-sided. Sales is something you do with somebody, not to somebody. So they have to stay in it too. But your job is to make it really easy for them to take the next step with you. And that means you have to initiate scheduling it. Because if somebody gets this on their calendar, if you schedule a circle back call with a client on their calendar, they're much more likely to actually take the time to think about, do I want to hire this person or not? Versus like, hey, let me know. They may never actually take the time to make a decision. So your job is to make it easy, get on their calendar. By the way, this whole thing works like always scheduling the next step with a client. You can actually have a conversation and move a client from start to finish of all 5 steps in one conversation. That's possible. It happens. But there's lots of times where it takes multiple conversations to earn somebody's business. So make sure you're always scheduling the next step, that you're just moving to the next step with them and that you're getting it on their calendar and on yours. Because I don't want you spending a bunch of time thinking like, should I call this person or not? Are they going to answer my call or should I send an email? Like spending all that time and energy, I call that an energy suck. Don't spend and waste time worried about should I call or shouldn't I? Have it on your calendar and then like, hey, it's time. We're going to talk today. Okay. So I want to, as we start to wrap up and before I open it up to questions, I love this quote from Jack Canfield that says, if you're not moving closer to what you want in sales or in life, you probably aren't doing enough asking. So I use the word, instead of asking, I always use the word invitation. I like the idea of inviting people to things because I think most people like to be invited, even if they don't want to go. I don't know about you, but if you hear that there's some great event going on, isn't it nice to get invited, even if you can't go or you don't want to go? None of us like to feel excluded. So when you invite people, all it is like it's a simple invitation. And if they decline, it's no hard feelings. Doesn't mean you're a bad person or they're a bad person. It just means like, hey, this isn't the right time for them. So here's a little secret about sales. Most people will not buy from you until you invite them. It's true. Our brains are lazy. Our brains are bombarded with decisions all day long. And many of us struggle with decision fatigue. So until somebody makes it really easy and issues an invitation, your brain won't go, do I want this or not? So it's your job to make it easy for the client, invite them to the next step, and then wait and see what they say. As my clients start to learn how to do this in their business, as they start to move people through the selling staircase, often what they come back and report is the sales process is so much easier. I'm much more confident in the conversation because I know what step I'm on. I know how to invite somebody to the next step. And now it feels conversational. It doesn't, again, feel like something I'm trying to do to somebody. It's something I'm doing with somebody. So here's my question for you this morning before we open it up to questions is which step might you be skipping in the selling process? It's very common for people to realize after they hear these 5 steps of like, "Oh, you know what I think I'm missing? I think I'm trying to skip through the discovery," or, "Oh, I'm never creating any curiosity out in the world, so I'm skipping that step," or, "I don't issue the close language, I'm skipping that step." So I'd love to know what steps you think you're skipping. And again, now it's just information for you to decide to learn something new, to change up your process a little bit, or frankly, to even get a process. So here's what we talked about this morning, why it's not just about filling a sales funnel, the number one mistake costing you sales, which of course is trying to skip steps, the 5 steps to mastering the sales conversation. Those steps again are introduction, curiosity, discovery, proposal, and close. And then we're going to open it up to questions. I'm so excited to hear what questions you have for me this morning. All sales related questions are on the table. If you have questions about the content that I presented today, I would love to hear those. And if you also want to share what was your big aha moment or what was your takeaway from today, I'd love to hear that as well. And I was given permission that I can offer a free gift for those of you who took time out of your day to spend with us this morning. I would love to give you my ebook called Closing the Sale. This really goes into the last 3 steps and gives you some language suggestions, gives you some ideas of how to move people through that process. So if you would like that, you can get it very simply by going to yoursalesmaven.com/BNI. BNI, super easy. I'll actually pop this in the chat for you. So if you want to just click the link and go there and download that book, my gift to you, everybody always says like, how much is it, Nikki? It's free. So I put on there, it's a free gift. I'm not charging for it. And now I'd love to hear your questions.
All right. So, Nikki, before we even get started on this, I'm getting comments and text on my phone from people who are blown away by this content. They love it. So
Thank you.
thank you for sharing that today. So, all right, here's our first question from Mark, who says, is there a time or maybe a timeline for achieving the 5 steps? And does it vary by industry?
It's more, there isn't necessarily a timeline. Like I said, sometimes it can happen in one simple conversation. You can move somebody through all 5 steps. Other times it can take multiple conversations, and that could take months or it could take years. And yes, so the question about industry, there are some industries where you have a much longer sales cycle. Real estate, typically, it's not like you can just meet somebody and be like, you ready to sell your house today, right? So there has to be that need and that want. I came from the tech space, and we used to have contracts, and there were certain times of the year where that was when people were buying, and there were other times where they were more just like gathering information. So it can be dependent on your industry. The most important thing though is that you understand which step you're on with the client, and that you always are moving them to the next step, or at least attempting to move them to the next step.
Great. Okay. How do you approach a prospect who wants to skip all the steps and go straight to price?
So if it's somebody you want to earn their business, go ahead and give them the price. And then now sometimes if somebody just approaches you, so I just want to take some context to this question. If somebody walks right up to you and they're like, "Hey, how much do you charge for your service?" You give the price as if you're giving the time of day. So you could say, my VIP program is $3,995. Is that something you'd like some additional information on? Or is that something you're interested in getting scheduled? Like, you can go ahead and issue the invitation. If somebody's just trying, like, somebody sends you something through your website and they're like, hey, how much do you charge for all this stuff? Well, one of the things I will say is I teach my clients to put some pricing on their website. I believe pricing should be on your website. That's a whole nother discussion about why, but I think it will enhance people's relationship with you if they don't have to call you and always ask for price first. But if that's the question, give the answer, give the price, and then invite them to whatever the next logical step is. If the next logical step is, and I'd be happy to take your credit card now, should we do that? That's fine too. Or if the next logical step is, here's the price, is that something you'd like to find out more and see if it's a good fit for you? Now we've moved them back to like discovery.
What are specific examples of your closing language?
So I think I gave some at the end.
Mm.
So I don't know if this question was earlier, but examples of closing language is that something you'd like to place the order for today? Is that something we can get on our schedules now? Um, is that something you'd like to move forward with? There's a lot of different ways that you can phrase it. It's after you've laid out the proposal that you want to make sure you're issuing closed language. And again, it's a yes or no question.
Great. Okay. What do you do if they schedule the next meeting, cancel the meeting before the date, and then never answer your emails or calls?
I send them what I call a closing the loop message. So if they've done that, I'm going to send in the subject line a closing the loop. And I'm going to say, it was so great to chat with you. Haven't been able to get back in touch. Have you decided not to move forward with this? If so, please let me know. At this point, I'll wait to hear from you and reach out to me when you're ready. Because I just say, like, hey, here's the ball. You own it. I'm not going to chase you.
I think that's great advice.
Thank you.
Okay, Martin says, in terms of getting others to refer you with the right language, do you give them a script? How do you do it?
You certainly can. It's important, if let me think about this. So, one of the ways about referrals is the way that you ask and that you be specific. So if you say to somebody like, "Hey, can you refer me to all your friends and family?" People are going to be like, "No."
Mm.
Right? But if you say to them, one of the things that I'm focused on in growing my business this year is working with people in this particular field. Who do you know that would be a good fit? And would you be willing to make an introduction? That's actually how I'd rather that you ask. But if you're just straight up asking for a referral, you can certainly give some language. And I would always make sure I'm building rapport with the person that I'm asking to do this. So I would say, here's an outline of language. You're welcome to use it. And of course, tweak it, whatever feels right to you. Um, I feel like we could do a whole class on
Yeah,
referrals.
especially for BNI, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jenny's asking, she says she loves the idea of intentional language. What suggestions do you have for engaging a sales team into this process and language?
Having a lot more conversation. So with the team, so I find a lot of times with teams that it's sometimes good, frankly, to bring in an outside trainer because if you're managing a sales team, a lot of times they get kind of used to your voice. It's just like how your kids get used to your voice too, right? And they can easily ignore you. And sometimes you want to bring somebody in from the outside who can help ignite your team to be excited about the selling process again and teaching them techniques that you may have been trying to teach them for years, but they got to hear it from somebody else or hear it in a new way. um, so I always think it's a good idea to bring in somebody for your sales team to engage them, to deliver some content, to have some opportunity for a lot of discussion to happen. So when I go in and do a training for sales teams, I always leave a lot of time for Q&A and discussion because a lot of really meaty things come out that oftentimes the boss might be like, I didn't even know people were thinking about that. I didn't know this was a challenge. Nobody really had brought it up to me in this way. So I don't know if I answered that question, but that's what comes to mind.
Okay, well, here's something in the same vein from Justin
Okay.
says, with your background in neurolinguistics, can you give additional examples of how your language changes from when following the sales staircase, in particular, from curiosity to discovery and then discovery to proposal?
So one of the ways that my sales language changes and using NLP, and this is we could again, I could teach a whole class just on this, is I tend to limit using I statements when I'm trying to move somebody through the selling process. I statements are about me, and you statements are about the reader or about the person you're in conversation with. You statements are much more interesting to them than I statements. So instead of me saying, like, I want to help you get X, Y, and Z in your business, instead, I might say, are you interested? I would ask a question. Are you interested in having X, Y, and Z in your business? If so, could we set up a time to chat about it? So I tend to ask questions versus make statements. And I try to really limit I statements, especially in text. Anything that's written, you want to limit your I statements. And I'll give you just a kind of a rule of thumb that I give my clients is if you go back and look at your messaging and you have an email that you've sent to a client and you're not getting the response you want, or whatever, you've written something, and I want you to count how many sentences are in the whatever piece that you've written. So let's say there are 10 sentences in there. A lot of times, because I rewrite my clients' emails all the time, I'll see they'll send 10 sentences and it will be riddled with 12 I statements. That's not interesting to a reader. That doesn't move people through the process. So, again, in live conversations of moving them from discovery to proposal and proposal to close, it can't be I statements. It's got to be you statements. It has to be questions.
Right. Okay. Um, Zach says he's in a very competitive industry. His company's service is similar, but very different in some critical ways that potential clients rarely know about. What are
Mhm.
some strategies for highlighting advantages working with us without bombarding them with information? Sometimes he feels he stumbles in the curiosity or discovery steps.
I'm going to give you my favorite way to frame a question. So, the question would be to ask the potential client, what do you already know about our product or service? And then wait, give them the opportunity to be the expert on what they know about your product or service. And then say this, you're right about, and then insert whatever they were saying about your product or your service that they're right about. And then say, and. So if somebody says, how do you work with clients, Nikki? And I say, what do you already know about the way that I work with clients? And maybe they say, well, I know you do some private one-on-one work. I might say, you're absolutely right. I do offer private one-on-one work. And I also have a Sales Maven Society, which is a membership platform. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Now I can start inserting after the and things they might not yet know. So the idea behind this is one, most of us like to be right. I don't know about you, but I love to be right. It's actually a problem in my home. Like my husband's like, why do you always have to be right? Right. Like I love to be right. So most people do. So when you say to them, you're right, that feels really good. That's very NLP. Like, oh, that feels good to me. You're validating me. I'm right. And whatever you say after and, the person who you're saying you're right to is more likely to want to agree. 'Cause it's like, "Yeah, I'm right." And, "Oh, yeah? What else? What else?" And they're, like, more interested. So that's the way I would frame it to start to plant the seed about all these other amazing things that make your product unique and different from the competitors.
Okay. Marcello asks, one of the most precious tools we have for reading the customer's body language, but virtually it's not the same. So how can we use this tool in such a restricted environment?
Well, if you can see them, sorry, I'm hitting my mic. If you can see the person, you can still make some assessments with body language. So body language is super powerful. If you are working with somebody and they're doing something, for instance, like maybe they're kind of leaning back and they're kind of chilling a little bit, that body language, if you sit up really straight and you sit like looking in the camera, it kind of is a mismatch. So notice that if they're sitting like, "Hmm, You don't necessarily want to do that, but you could kind of lean to the side a little bit and you can start to match and mirror body language a little bit. If they're talking and there's a lot of excitement to their voice, you can't keep your voice like this because they're going to wonder what's wrong with you. So adjust your style to the other person. So you can do this if you're on the phone with somebody, you can do it if you can see them. Even if all you can see is this little part of their body, you can still see facial expressions. You can still hear voice quality.
Okay. By the way, Nikki, we have another 53 questions. We're not going to get to all of them.
Oh,
I think we broke records today on Q&A. So I'm going to just ask the ones and maybe group together ones that are similar so we can get as much information out as possible. Okay. Let's see. Here's one. What's the best way to get a really good education in sales coming from zero sales experience?
find people who resonate with your style that feel good to you. And there's so many great resources out there. If you're a podcast listener, there's some phenomenal sales podcasts out there. There's great, blog posts that have been written. There's lots of free training available on YouTube. Like there's great books out there. So there's a lot of ways to learn, but usually if you really want to dig into sales, your best bet is to find somebody who has a sales side and a sales expertise. Like some people say they teach sales, but they actually have never been in sales. So check out somebody's bio. Do they actually have background in sale? Have they had any success at it? And if you like their style, go learn from them. They'll teach you more than you can get out of books and podcasts. But if the first step is just listening to a great podcast or reading a great sales book, I'll tell you one of my all-time favorite is oh my gosh, my brain just went like completely shut down. I'll think of it. I'm so sorry.
We'll come back. Don't worry, there's
Okay.
plenty more
Okay.
questions.
Okay.
Okay, so Karen asks, she struggles with creating curiosity. What would you suggest that she can do to work on that?
So the idea is that you practice. So come up with a curiosity creating statement. I always tell my clients to do this too. Like on a Monday, decide what's the thing that you might say this week just to test creating curiosity. And you say it to everybody. So think of your answer to how are you? Because that's a really common question we all get asked. You get asked it when you're ordering coffee. You get asked it when you're meeting people. Like, you get asked it on the phone all the time. People say, how are you? So practice your answer and say it to everybody. One time I was practicing creating curiosity. And so I always come up with my answer for the week and say it. I was actually at my hygienist. I was getting my teeth cleaned. She had her hands in my mouth and she started giving me buying signals. I had to wait till she got her hands out of my mouth to then invite her to the next step in the selling staircase with me. So just practice with everybody. That's how you get better at creating curiosity because you'll start to see what works. If you give your curiosity creating statement and people go, that's nice. Did you see the game last night? Then it didn't work. And you got to just practice and come up with something a little bit different. So just continue to tweak and get playful with it.
Okay. Dan is saying, can you please remind him of the step after close when the prospect insists on calling you back?
The circle back call. So if the prospect is insisting on calling you back, then I bless and release and say, great, I'll look forward to hearing from you when you're ready. And I'll be super, super excited to earn your business when the time is right. And then bless and release, move on.
Nice. Okay. So Charlotte asks, she owns a bridal boutique. Lots of brides want to shop around before they commit. Is there a way to manage it?
Yeah. Give them some incentive, Charlotte, for making a decision sooner rather than later. So create some sense of urgency. That's another way. I remember one of my friends when she got married and she went into her bridal shop, they offered a 10% discount if she bought the first time she was in the shop. So she could try on as many dresses as she wanted. After she left the shop, the 10% discount went away. And she bought at that first shop because she was not going to give up that special price. It doesn't always have to be a discount. It could be some kind of a gift or some incentive, but give people make it easy for them to make a decision and then give them an incentive to make one.
Okay. Nish is asking, how do you handle the budget money question, specifically when they're not sure about their budgets or not ready to commit?
So one of the things I always like is to test. So the money is often that kind of that first objection, like, I'm not really sure if I can work this into my budget. One of the ways that I overcome this, and this may or may not work for your business, so I'm not totally sure what your business is, but I will say, if I was able to offer you a payment plan, is that something you'd be interested in talking about? Notice I don't go into the payment plan. I ask the question. That's called checking to like uncover the objection, because I just want to know, is the real objection price or is it something else? Because if I say to somebody, if I'd be, if I was able to offer you a payment plan, is that something you'd be interested in? And if they go like, it wouldn't really even matter what the payment plan is. That's either not their real objection, or frankly, they can't afford my services. And therefore, there's no hard feelings, but they're just not a client.
Right. Okay. If the prospect starts bargaining about the price, how do you close it?
So one of the things I will say when somebody is like, well, if you would offer me a discount and blah, 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 there's certain things I would never discount. So I just say, I really appreciate you asking. I don't discount that service. Is that something you'd still be interested in moving forward with? So I still issue an invitation, even when they ask for a discount. I will say I'm not opposed to giving discounts, but I don't just give them randomly. So if somebody wants a discount, I have to get something in return. This creates a balance of power in the relationship. You never want the client to hold all the power. You don't want you to hold all the power, because that's just not a good relationship. So you got to balance it. So if somebody were to say, Nikki, if I could get, this many coaching sessions, or if they say, I want your coaching sessions at this price, if it worked for my business, I might say, if that's something you're willing to buy 10 up front, I'd be happy to honor that price to you. So I have to get something in return for a discount. Otherwise, it holds no value. And then they see your product and your service as being less valuable.
Okay. So let's let Nikki be able to take a breath as we go into a few more questions. But what I wanted to mention is that a lot of you are asking how you'll be able to see this again. We will post this to BNI University, and you'll be able to find it probably within the next 24 hours. Okay, ready, Nikki?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. What if someone asks about price in the beginning and it's not really possible to answer because the work included is more complex?
Okay, I love this question so much. Here's what I don't want you to say to somebody is, it depends, even though it does depend. I get it. Okay. So when somebody says, what's the price for this? I want you to give a range, because when somebody asks for price, you need to give it. You need to give something. So I might say, a project that could range anywhere from $100 to 100,000. I don't actually care what your range is. I care that you give a range. And you say, and in order for me to be able to give you a specific on that, I'd need to find out a little bit more about your project and some specifics. Is it okay if I ask you a couple quick questions? So I'm going to give a range, and then I'm going to turn it right back to, may I ask you some questions?
Okay. Rich is asking, do any of your books cover how you use NLP in sales?
So the very first book that I ever wrote is called 6-Word Lessons on Influencing with Grace. I actually wrote it before I started my business. So I took, and it's a bunch of little sales tips. It's 100 NLP tips that apply to conversation. So you can absolutely read that and take those NLP tips and apply it to your sales interactions. But frankly, all of my, like everything I do, I show up with NLP, because I can't not. I have a very extensive background in it. So none of my books specifically comment around, or at least the other two, Buying Signals and The Selling Staircase. I'm not digging into like, this is a specific NLP technique and this is how you use it. I do teach some of that stuff in my live trainings, but in the books, I'm just giving you like, here's what you need to know to move clients to the next step. And here's the language. I'm not going into a bunch of detail as to why you need this and how it's related to NLP.
Great. Jay's asking a BNI question. He is the new education coordinator in his chapter. What are a couple of the best things we can teach the chapter to bring more referrals?
Oh, sorry, Steve, I thought that was a question for you. And then I was starting to read chat. Would you tell me
Do you
again?
want me?
I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, it says, what are the a couple of the best things we can teach the chapter to bring more referrals?
One of the best things that you can teach the chapter to bring more referrals is to make sure they're actually asking. Sometimes people think it's an implied, like it's implied, of course you're welcome to come to BNI, but I would actually challenge your chapter members. Would you be willing, and this is how I'd ask them, would you be willing to invite 3 people this week to attend a chapter? Give them specific like tasks to do. Don't just say like invite everybody because that's too big of an ask, right? But if you say invite 2 people, invite 3 people, or you could say which 3 people will you be inviting this week? Give them a specific like task to do and you'll find it's more successful.
Okay, great. Tim is asking, can you display the 5-step staircase on screen again?
I sure can.
I feel like somebody's going to
Maybe.
be in a screenshot in a second. I already did mine. Um, get with it.
Can I?
I
Let
was
me
like,
see. It's not letting me end
oh,
my,
we'll move back.
let me see. Hold on. I think I have to stop sharing for just a second and get out of here. So sorry. Here it is.
That's fine. All right, we've got about 5 more minutes for questions, and then, we're going to
Okay.
wrap it up. So let's see. Oh, there it
Oh,
goes.
there you go. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. Oh, here's a good one. Mim is asking, in some industries, it's a problem to get past the gatekeeper. How do you use NLP to overcome this hurdle?
So, one of the ways to get past the gatekeeper is to ask, when you call the person, say, is it okay if I ask you for a favor? Most people, when you say, is it okay to ask you for a favor? They already want to say yes before they even know what the favor is. And then ask them, who's the best person in your organization to talk to about X, Y, and Z? So I would frame it that way. So now it's like, hey, you and I are in this together. Now it's not going to work every time, but it will work more than not because people want to help. Like most, especially people who are gatekeepers, they might be a gatekeeper, but their real passion oftentimes is to show up with a servant's heart. They want to serve, they want to make a difference, they want to make an impact. So give them a way to serve and make them like get them on your side. Is it okay to ask you for a favor? Who's the best person in your organization to talk to about X, Y, and Z?
Great. Okay, Arlene's asking for you to talk a little bit more about the I statements in an email. She thinks it's incredibly valuable.
I love this and I teach it a lot. I teach a whole masterclass on this and I have classes about this all the time. And this is like a game changer for somebody. So, for instance, we often will say things like, I want to tell you about this. You never need to say in an email, I want to tell you about this. Just tell them, like, say whatever it is. Instead of saying, like, I want you to register here, just say, register here. You can leave off I statements. Instead of saying, I can go on and on for examples of it. But again, if you just follow that little rule of thumb that I gave, when you write your I statement or when you write your email, and by the way, I still do this too, because we write the way that we think. So we have a thought and then we type it out, right? But before you send your email, go back and look at it and go, how many sentences are here? How many I statements are in here? And I need to get some of them out. The objective is not to never use an I statement because frankly, grammatically, that's not possible. It's more I like follow the 80-20 rule. So if you send a 10 sentence email, my objective is to never have more than 2 I statements. Now, if you have 3, doesn't mean you need to keep like not send the email. But if you have 12 in a 10 sentence email, you need to rewrite it. You've got to change up that language a little bit.
Okay, Derek. Oh, Derek, I feel you on this one. He says, back to the gatekeeper. Often they'll ask you to send details by email. How is the best way to deal with that?
One of the ways is in email, the technique is you want to write a compelling email, but one of the things you want to also do is you want to make it really easy for the person to take the next step with you. So instead of saying to somebody, like, if you love this information, then go ahead and schedule a time on my calendar to chat. No, do not do that. Instead, say, um, what would you think about us scheduling a time for a 5 or 10 minute Here are a few possible times. And then I actually give 3 ranges of time. And the objective is to not make it hard for that person. The objective is to make it easy so they can just look at their calendar and go, oh, we could get on the phone, Thursday at between 10 and 10:30. I've got that open in my schedule. And all they have to do is send back like, okay, call me at 10. Well, now we actually have an appointment scheduled versus telling them to schedule on your link is asking them to do all the work. And I love a calendar link too. Like I get it. I get a lot of pushback from clients about this. But if you're willing to give them 3 options of time, and it's ranges of time, by the way, the language is, Thursday, anytime between 9 and 10:15, or Friday, anytime between 1 and 2:30. Give ranges of time so they can pick it. And you actually do need to say anytime between, because if you say Friday, 9 to 10:15, it sounds like you're asking for an hour and 15-minute appointment. So you got to put any time between it. That 3 times language, by the way, is like, it's one of my secret sauces. This is how, frankly, I got to be here with you guys today. That this is how Claire and I initially got our appointment scheduled, was I gave her 3 times. I didn't ask her to go schedule on my calendar.
Yeah, I think that makes a difference. Okay, let's end with this one. Even
Okay.
though there are still 56 questions, we actually answered about 25 questions, and there's 3 more than what we started with. So let's just go with this one. Can you talk a little bit about your podcast and what it's like?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. The format of the podcast is I do individual solo episodes where I teach. I love to teach. So the individual episodes are me giving selling advice, language techniques and tips. And then I do on-air coaching calls with my existing clients. So those actually are really popular because it gives people an opportunity to kind of sit back and be the observer as I coach and start to think about, how does this apply to your business? How can you take what I just gave for a piece of advice for this person and apply it to your own business? And then the third part is I share success stories, talking about how my clients have implemented certain things. I actually bring the client on and they share, like, this is actually what I did, and here are the results that I got. So those are the 3 aspects of the podcast. And I would absolutely be so honored if anybody is interested to go check it out, listen to a couple of episodes and see what you think. And you're welcome to reach out to me. By the way, my podcast listeners also get access to additional content from me. So you can go listen to the podcast. You'll see there's a link in the show notes to access a resource center that I have just for listeners. And I have quite a bit of extra content in there.
That's good to know. Well, we already have people in the chat saying they've already subscribed. We have people who are ordering your books online right now. So you made a really great impression on everybody. What a really wonderful podcast this was today. I have so many notes. Look at this. I got like a whole, well, you can't even see it, but it's a whole page of notes, and I've been taking screenshots. Really amazing. So thanks so much for being on today. If you know someone like Nikki who can provide great content like this for our members, please reach out to Claire, CLAIRE at BNI.com. And, she would love to schedule that person. So thanks again, Nikki, for being on today. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everybody. Sending good wishes your way.
Okay, take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.